Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode number 26 of Everything Playbook. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for being here. I hope you're having a great June. Today's guest is Andy Budd. Andy is a design coach, design leader, venture capitalist, and advisor to startups and early stage founders. I first came across Andy quite recently through a talk he gave on the Awards YouTube channel that was actually posted about 6 years ago. In the talk, Andy spoke about the importance of great design, how design creates meaningful connections with consumers, and how design can communicate something deeper about the people behind it. I really enjoyed the talk, even though it was recorded 6 years ago. I think a lot of what he discussed has aged remarkably well. I'll leave a link to the talk in the description below. The second and sort of the main reason why I wanted to speak with Andy is because the talk was recorded at a very different moment in time. 6 years ago, most of us were primarily working with other human beings and using technology as a tool to get work done. Today, we are living through a very different reality. We still collaborate with people, but increasingly, we are also collaborating with AI. In many cases, AI is no longer just a tool, it is becoming a colleague. And for a growing number of one person businesses, AI is a primary partner. Because of that shift, I was really curious to understand how Andy sees the world today. Has his understanding of what makes a great designer and a founder changed? Because when the way we communicate and collaborate changes, the very definition of these roles start to evolve as well. We touched on what Andy thinks about the future of design, product, leadership in a world where humans and AI are increasingly working side by side. How have roles like product designer, product manager, and even founder evolved over the last few years? And more importantly, how will they continue to evolve over the next decade? We also spent some time discussing his work with founders in early stage companies, what he looks for in people, what catches his attention as an investor, and the qualities he believes are more important when building products and businesses today. One thing I particularly enjoyed about this conversation was Andy's willingness to really explore ideas in depth. You could give him a topic and he would follow the thought wherever it led him. And overall, I think this is a really insightful conversation, especially if you're a founder, you work in tech, design products, advise businesses, or you're simply curious about how the relationship between humans, AI, tech, and the work is evolving. Lastly, I've linked all of Andy's resources in the description below. And if you haven't already subscribed to Everything Playbook, please consider following the podcast on Spotify and subscribing across the other social channels as well. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Andy Budd as much as I enjoyed recording it. I've been a huge fan of like the awards platform like for more than a decade. I've always enjoyed the kind of talents that they kind of produce and they bring forth and everything. And I think that's like one of those platforms that have been consistently doing so well till now. And I really appreciate it, especially in the age of like tech and AI, etc. The fact that they are so committed to still showing like human talent. I think that's like pretty cool. I once in a while I kind of like watch their videos, like old videos, like 6 years, 10 years back, and everything. And I don't know, like literally, like just a day before I sent you the email, I bumped into the video that of you from the awards YouTube channel, and I really liked it. I really appreciated the kind of the energy, the value, the sincerity in what you actually said about the importance of leadership in general, but also the importance of the design, having an eye for the design leadership, and how to actually be a better leader and to curate people and to sort of like lift people up and everything. And I think as an individual, especially now that we all have an opportunity to be a leader, I think messages like that are kind of like apply to everyone right now. So it was really interesting, and I was like, I want to talk to Wade. It was great message. That was 6 years back. A lot has changed right now in the tech industry, and I sort of wanted to kind of understand about your evolution of the thought process and your evolution of like how you see the industry and leadership in general and things like this. So that is why I wanted to like have you, and I want to speak with you. So thanks a lot again. Just thanks a lot for being on the podcast.
Oh, well, it's my pleasure, and please do call me Andy.
All right. Thanks a lot. And so the first thing that I sort of kind of want to brush and like get started with is that you've been a design leadership coach. Like that's been like your career. You've been doing that for many years. You've coached people. You've trained people. You've worked with startups and like a lot of organizations, etc., and things like this. So from the moment when you actually got into, you created this career, it was a very different time period, right? I mean, it was a very different industry. The industry that we know, the technology industry that we know today, it was very different back then. Because back then, when you were coaching, humans were working with human beings, and we were just using tech products as a means to get things done. But at the end of the day, our major commitment was towards people. A lot of communication that we do was towards people. But right now, it's totally different. It's very different, because now, as a human being, in order to build something, in order to build a product, you're not only talking to human beings, but you're also talking to tech. You're literally like communicating with tech. And in some cases, in many cases lately, you can completely skip the part of speaking with humans and just speak with AI and tech and get things done, like get products and stuff and done. So, just talking about it, like, what are, like, from the time you made that video or from the time you started the career, what are some things that you feel the role of being a leader, like in a design organization, or just in any kind of like a tech organization, you have like witnessed has like completely like changed over time, compared to like how it was like a decade ago and like how it was right now?
Gotcha. Brilliant question, Priyanka. Weirdly, the answer might be a little bit unsatisfying because at the moment, in terms of leadership at least, I don't think as much has changed as we would think. And I give you sort of a bit of context here. So arguably, like people have been using AI LLMs for a while now, but it was really only in December when the capabilities really exploded. And around December, all of my engineering friends have said there's been a step change in the power of these platforms. And before we were kind of playing and exploring, and it was fun. But since December, we are now, rather than writing code, we are spooling up a whole bunch of agents to write the code for us. And so we've been managing all of these agents. And that's very true of the engineering space. And now a lot of, not all, but a very large number of particularly tech companies I meet, the engineering team are fully bought into the idea of this new way of working. And they've got loads of engineers kind of running a team of agents for them. Of course, what we've seen over the last couple of months is now CFOs are starting getting the bill for these agents and are quite surprised is that actually the cost of running these platforms are slightly more than they're expecting and are actually telling people to kind of roll back. And I think that's kind of difficult. I think it's difficult to put the genie back in the bottle. It's a bit like, suddenly deciding that you don't want to use spell check anymore because it's too expensive and you got so used to using this tool, it's difficult. So we're going through an interesting period over the last 6-7 months with engineering. Design has been sat on the sidelines almost, waiting to see what happened. Partly because engineering has usually a board seat, a CTO. Um, and so, and often like engineering is a blocker. Like engineering has always been a blocker in terms of we've got a massive backlog. We can't hire or find the number of engineers we need to shift that backlog. And so there's always been a kind of an opportunity there. And now this new technology it's speeding things up. And we've seen the backlog being cleared faster and faster and faster. Designers have been watching this, but they haven't necessarily felt the pressure from the leadership teams to jump in. But that pressure is starting to come through. So 3 or 4 months ago, I wasn't talking to any of my coaching clients, or more importantly, they weren't talking to me about how AI was kind of massively affecting their work. But 3 or 4 months later, that is definitely starting now. Not all of them, but a significant portion of my coaching clients have had conversations with their CEOs that have said, look, this experiment's working with our engineering team. We now need to start having design and product jump in. Now, product has been very receptive to this, you could argue. Like product managers, because of the kind of thing that they could do, it's very research based. They've been very quick at creating synthetic users. They've been very quick at having these tools to write PRDs. They've been very quick at having these tools to kind of explore strategic directions, because you don't need a specialist tool. But for designers, you need specialist tools. And actually, it's also taken a while for these tools to come in. You're now starting to see Adobe and Figma build credible functionality into their products, whereas maybe 6 months ago it was a little bit more kind of a sort of a side event. But now these tools are getting more powered. You've got products like Lovable who are exploding, and a lot of product people are starting to use Lovable for prototyping. And then we're now starting to see products like pencil and paper and what have you that are actually getting really, really popular. And you're starting to see teams use Figma less and less. Like, I don't think Figma's going away. But I was at a big event, well, actually a big event. I was at an invite-only event for design leaders in San Francisco a couple of months ago, where all of the top design leaders from Anthropic, OpenAI, Adobe were there. And all of the teams were saying, you know, we've not stopped using Figma, but we're now maybe using it 30% of the time rather than 90% of the time. And actually, we're not using one tool that's replacing it, we're using 4 or 5. And so the tool landscape has got really confusing. And so at the moment, a lot of the design leaders I work with are basically trying to figure out their new way of working in an environment which is changing all the time. So that is something that is weighing on their minds. It hasn't necessarily changed the way that design leaders think, though, because design leaders always have had to kind of figure out new processes and new practices and an update based on new technology. I think for me, the real challenge is one around kind of timing and opportunity. Because I think if designers sit on the fence for too long, we're moving into a world, frankly, where engineers can design, product managers can code. And so, if you have a world where that happens, do you even need designers? And so you could totally see that some organizations might be cutting out design because the product managers are prototyping, they're handing over to the engineers are making designs based on an existing company's design system. And maybe you only need a couple of designers to manage the design system. And that's definitely one future. And I do think that if designers sit back and don't engage, that might be the result for a lot of designers. But the alternative is true. A lot of designers have seen problems with their platforms, things that are broken, things that are annoying, inconsistencies that they've up until this point not been able to fix because they don't have the technical skills and they can't get the engineers to do it because it's not a new feature and it doesn't necessarily meet the product team's like desires either. Whereas now the designers can go and fix this. They can go and do prototypes. They can go and, commit code. They can do, pull requests. And so I'm now starting to see a lot of design teams be a lot more active. I think one of the best examples of this is a company used to be called Intercom and has now been changed its name to Fin. And actually, Fin literally just announced today that they were being bought by Salesforce for something like $3.5 billion. So really, really successful company. They have been at the forefront of designers using AI. So all of their designers can make code, all their designers can make change. If they see something broken, they don't have to plead and beg for resources, they can just fix it. And so we're now moving to this world where the designers, the engineers, and the product people are now not reliant on each other as much, and they can look at the problems from their perspective and go out there and push them and solve them. And so the mood that I'm finding from a lot of design leaders is not one of confusion or fear, but one of like opportunity. What can this tool allow us to do in the next 6 months? Well, we can redesign the way we work, and maybe we can have more of an impact than we've been able to do before because we're not relying on some of the other sort of business partners. We don't have to make a case for this or get resource from that. And so I think it's really, really interesting. And in fact, the timing has been great here. I think it's so interesting that I'm organizing a new conference aimed at designers down in Brighton called Design Plus AI, all about the kind of the intersection of design and AI and what these sort of big companies are doing. So I think it's a really exciting time. It doesn't come without challenges, but it's definitely exciting.
Yeah, right. I'm a product manager. That's actually like my full time. When I started using AI for in my job, like within my to do some sort of like a deep research to figure out like much more broader ideas or something like that, I went through a lot of phases of like processing that. Initially, I was like, wait, what the hell? Like the things that I used to spend so much time like doing, now in just like a few prompts, it's kind of like giving me the answer. But then I also sort of like had to become optimistic at some point in the sense like, okay, wait, if I can give up these tasks to AI, I can then extend my mind to doing something beyond what I've been doing for like so long and something. So I don't know. I kind of like always juggle between being scared
in a way about like, wait, like, okay, how far can I stretch? And the more that I stretch, the more that it can do. Then okay, so what do I do next? What do I do next? And what do I do next? So that is that anxiety as well. But of course, also I think it kind of relieves you from doing the same boring, monotonous stuff
Yeah.
like over and over again. And like,
And actually, on that point, also kind of going back to your initial question, I think if product managers are doing less admin around PRDs and keeping tickets, up to date, and if designers are doing less kind of just shipping minor updates, and if engineers are doing less kind of like kind of technical debt and kind of like hand coding, it means that we all are freed up in time to actually communicate better, to work better, and to, if now the blocker isn't like, do we have enough time to do it? But like, we've got all the time in the world now. What do we do? I think that actually opens up, hopefully, a much more. And this is what I'm seeing in companies. Like, I'm seeing product managers and designers and engineers spending more time talking to each other, and more time strategizing, and more time thinking, and more time having respect for each other's job. Because, like, if engineers are now having to do design and they're finding it difficult, and product managers are now shipping code and they're finding it difficult, we all have an understanding, a much better understanding of each other's skill set. And often we're going to engineering partners and saying, look, I've just released this thing and it doesn't work. Can you help me? So I actually think we're going to hopefully, one future, I mean, again, all of this is up for conjecture, but I think one future is we talk more rather than less, but we talk about things that matter more rather than just the detail. Because if we're drowning in the detail, there's never the time to kind of talk about the really interesting topics. So I hope it will be largely a good thing. Now, there is a caveat here, and a big caveat, which is, um, I think a lot of people, designers, products, people and engineers, think that the change we're making now is going to be the change that will drive us for the next 20 years. The thinking is like, hey, we've got a whole bunch of new tools. We're not using Figma. We're not using, kind of like hand coded. We're now using these tools, and our work will just change. Or we'll still be shipping stuff, but we're just using different ways to do that. But I actually also think we are moving to a world where the tools themselves will make those decisions. In a world where a tool set could do multivariate testing, can come up with a hypothesis and test it. Do you really need an engineer? Do you really need a designer? Do you really need a product manager? And so we're already moving to this world of like self-healing systems. There's lots of tools out there now where rather than a product manager has to write a ticket about a bug, the system discovers a bug, it fixes it itself. And so I think we're moving really quickly to, well, we'll do multivariate testing and we'll test ourselves. And then after that, well, why not have tools that create different versions of the interface based on the design system and a set of rules for different needs? Like, a lot of a product manager's job is deciding what to build next and playing off trade-offs. We've got 15 things we can build. Should we build 1, 2, 3, or 4? Now, if you can ship all of those things simultaneously, nobody needs to make that decision. If you never have to write a PRD because the system is doing it in the background, you don't have to do all the admin. And if the system is self-optimizing in the same way as like a Netflix homepage optimizes the movies based on each individual user's needs, we are moving to a world where the system will create fundamentally different interfaces based on user needs. And in that world, engineering, maybe less so, but design and product management might not be a job in the next 5 or 6 years. And so I think where we're moving into at the moment is a transition period to something even bigger and more interesting. But that is also quite scary, I think, for a lot of people in their jobs.
yeah, exactly. I mean, partly interesting because I like, I also like have a full-time career. Like, my role, for example, as a product manager, I don't really see this as something that has like a huge potential, like that's gonna like just stay. I don't see this role just like being like existing for like many, many years down the line, right? Of course, like I said, the roles and responsibility that I have, I can already give it up to like AI a lot, and now I have to keep figuring out. But whatever I learn to figure out, AI is going to get so much better that it learns to do the things that I have now figured out as well. So I think like getting into a little bit into the uncomfortable area, a lot of roles are at risk, basically. A lot, like almost everything. Like initially, I thought, hey, wait, maybe only the people who are in the tech industry, they are going to be affected. But people who are in the creative industry, they might not get affected. But that's not the case anymore. In just like 1 year, my perspective on that is completely different, because now AI can like think better, write better, write faster. And we are also moving in a culture where it's all about speed. It's all about like velocity, like more. And we are also optimizing for, wait, let me use this AI to do more, let me use this AI to do more, rather than let me humanly take my time, humanly work with other people and do the things that let it take the time that it deserves. And so that's how, obviously, like a, yeah, like it's a concerning. But like, are you in general like concerned about the job market?
I mean, this is a really tricky thing for me to say, but I am of an age now where my concerns about the job market for me are low, because I will be retiring at some stage in the near future, and this is not a situation that I feel that I'm probably likely to have to navigate.
Yeah.
But as they sort of say,
No, I didn't.
kind of
Actually, I didn't say exactly you, but
no, I know. But what I was gonna say, like, there's a scene in Back to the Future where, Doc Brown says it's your kids, Marty. You need to worry about your kids, and I think that's where we are at the moment. I think it's that kind of that first generation entering the workforce, and the people who are in the middle generation, who have 10 or 15 years worth of knowledge based on the old way of working, that overnight that knowledge, a big chunk of it will go. And so I think there are definitely challenges ahead. Now, it's really complicated, and we're not going to get to the bottom of this on a short podcast, and I don't think there is an answer. Like, um, but there are different philosophies here, or different beliefs. There are a group of people who are really concerned that like 90% of jobs will be automated, and in a world of 90% job automation, particularly white collar jobs, we might have mass unemployment or mass underemployment. And I think that, is a possibility. There's another group of people that point to the past and say every time there has been a big industrial revolution, people have always worried about mass unemployment, and it's never come to pass. What ends up happening is these new technologies create new jobs that we could never have imagined. You could never have imagined 30 years ago, 40 years ago, around a web designer being in existence. And so, there were all of these kind of new tools that kind of create new jobs. And so that is also a possibility. Like the centrist person I am, I think I probably sit somewhere in the middle of those two competing arguments. And the reason is, I think I don't necessarily agree with the sort of the previous idea that, like, well, I do agree that this technology will create a whole bunch of new jobs. The question isn't whether it's binary, it creates new jobs or not. I guess the question is whether it creates as many new jobs or more new jobs than were destroyed. And I think that this time it might be slightly different from previous times, because um, if you look at past industrial revolutions, a classic example would be the creation of the engine. Before the engine, you had to rely on manpower or horsepower. So you had to have people, moving a wheel to pump water, or then you used to have a whole bunch of animals tied to a wheel, moving the water pump around, and you needed people to look after the animals. So you needed kind of like every time you use the physical element, you gave it to a machine, you gave it to an animal, and then you had to use something else that was human. And so, we moved from physical labor to dexterity, to weaving. And then we had automated looms. And then we moved to calculation. We had kind of, the rooms full of people using kind of calculators to kind of do the accounts at the end of the year. And then we moved to kind of spreadsheets. And so every single time we've had an industrial revolution, we've taken a lower level human capacity, we've replaced it by technology, and that's allowed us to do a higher level capacity. And so, after kind of like, calculation, we started to use our creativity, through design. We started to use our problem solving skills through logic and engineering. We try to use our kind of social skills to kind of manage contracts and do legal, things. The problem is, I think AI is now starting to come for those high level skills. The logic, the emotion, the creativity, is being done. Now, it's not being done as well, but it is being done. And I think the problem is the whole idea of the Pareto principle. What is it, like 80% or 90% of everything is rubbish? And I think that's true in everything. I think 80% or 90% of design is rubbish. And so what does AI bring to the design industry? Well, it raises the floor. It doesn't hit the ceiling. And so that last 10% of people who are better than AI, I think will still be in employment. But if a graduate straight out of university is now not going to be as good at doing design as a designer with an AI powered creativity tool, then there's a really good chance that those early stage kind of jobs where you are allowed to be crap because you need bodies to kind of do the work, like all those early jobs go. And so there is a real fear that, like, will AI, if AI is basically at the moment as smart as an intern, that's great, except if you want to become an intern. And so we're already starting to see this in the UK. We're starting to see, I don't think it's specific around AI, but I think AI is an accelerant. We're starting to see graduates really struggle to find graduate level jobs. And I think AI is only going to accelerate. Why would you go and hire an intern if you can ask Claude or ChatGPT to go and do a level of research for you that is intern level? And it'll get things wrong, but interns get things wrong. However, the counter to that is actually, I think it's a mid-level, mid-skilled people that are going to be a real problem, because arguably, I would say an intern with an AI tool is able to generate design, code, legal recommendations as good as a mid-level kind of, designer, engineer, lawyer with maybe 10 years experience. They still might not be able to do the kind of the designer or the engineer with 30 or 40 years experience. And so actually, I think when you see a lot of mid-level jobs stripped out, because why not pay an intern or someone with 2 or 3 years experience, a senior designer who may be getting in San Francisco 200 or 300K. Why not give a junior designer straight out of university 100K and like 50K's worth of tokens for ChatGPT, and you're saving yourself a bunch of money? So I actually think a lot of the mid-level skills will be stripped out. And I think they'll be stripped out also because it's those mid-level practitioners that have got 15 years of experience overnight has become somewhat irrelevant. If you're an amazing designer and you understand how to do a whole bunch of particular research skills, but that can now done by the machine, then those are necessary. Like if people are doing workshops, if people are doing personas, all these kind of things. And so I'm actually seeing a lot of people that have got 15 years experience now operating at the same level as somebody with 2 years experience and all the tools around them. And so I think there's going to be rather than it being entry level jobs that are going to go, I think we're going to have mid-level jobs. And so this is true across all kinds of industries. I think every industry will be different. The argument for legal is that if all of the easy legal problems can be automated, does that mean that actually people will go and raise legal challenges they wouldn't have been able to raise before because they couldn't afford it or didn't have knowledge? I mean, again, we're seeing this at the moment. People who never would have even thought that they had a legal case dropping their situation in ChatGPT saying, hey, you should go and see a lawyer, and suddenly lawyers are getting inundated with stuff. And the same with medical, like people that had a bit of an ache, didn't think there was any problem. Now ChatGPT is like telling them to go to the doctors. And there's a lot of false positives here, but also hopefully there will be a lot of kind of new things happening. Now, do I want to live in a world where AI has made it hugely litigious because it's much easier to sue people? I don't know. Do I want to live in a world where now the NHS is flooded with people like with phantom illnesses? I don't know either. But I think that will create a lot of jobs and it will destroy a lot of jobs. And so, look, who knows? What I think, all I can really comment on, I think some industries will collapse. I mean, this is it. The reality is, I think some industries will go down from 100% to 20% of the number of roles they need. I think some industries will go from like 100% to 80%. And some industries might go from 100% to 120. And I think it's a real dice game as to whether you're in an industry that will be massively automated, or whether the automations will give you more jobs. And so who knows? We will find out in the next 5 or 10 years. But yeah, I wouldn't want to be starting a career necessarily in the knowledge industries. I mean, I it's not joking even, like, I think the people that aren't going to be affected by this are going to be plumbers, they're going to be electricians, they're going to be people that have a physical skill that is underserved and underutilized. Like, just in my local area, trying to find a good plumber, trying to find a good electrician is next to impossible.
Yeah.
And so actually, I think we're going to see a lot more younger people not want to go to university, not want to get like tons of debt, not want to jump into these tech roles or these legal roles or these professional roles, and maybe go back to kind of like blue collar jobs.
Right.
The other thing I'm going to say, then I'll shut up because I realize I've been speaking a lot.
It's okay. It's your space.
But I come from a world. Part of my day job is working in VC, investing in startups, and I think there's a lot of people who are looking at their job prospects and thinking that AI is really destabilizing them or minimizing them. I mean, again, just the last couple of years, we've seen mass redundancies from tech companies, and a lot of people have been unemployed for a really long time. But those people now have the means with which to build new products. And so I think there's almost like a golden age of startups. I think, if you rather than going and working with somebody, it's much easier to be entrepreneurial now. You don't have to raise money because you don't have to hire a bunch of developers. You don't have to have a network. If you were a teacher before or you wanted to raise money, you had to find a CTO. Now you can kind of like just roll your own. And so I think we're moving to this sort of long tail world where we're going to have hundreds, thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands of new entrepreneurs. And these are not going to be people that are making billion-dollar businesses like Airbnb, but they're people that can run solo small businesses and be doing 200K, 500K, a million a year with just maybe 1 or 2 employees that can help them. And so I think we are moving to this sort of almost this weird world of kind of long tail entrepreneurship. So yeah, it's interesting. Again, I'm not saying it's good, but it's a fascinating time to be around. That's for sure.
Yeah. I completely double everything that you said. Starting with the famous quote that we have, yeah, in the industrial age as well, we had like a lot of technological advancements, and people are afraid that they were going to lose a job, but then people just like rolled up their sleeve and they started like doing other things, etc. But I completely agree with you. I think that quote is just like not relevant right now, because it's exactly like you said. At that point, when you are replacing doing mental mathematics like with calculator or something like that, you still had like endless opportunities to expand yourself, like mentally, physically, there were like so many options to like do to kind of like diversify your skills and your knowledge and all these kind of things. But right now, your core skills of being human, your core skills of being creative, if that is being replaced, then what are you left with? So that's it's hard. Like, it's not the same saying that, yeah, in the industrial age as well, people complained, but then they moved on to doing other things. That just does not apply to where we are heading, like right now.
Well, a couple of things jumping in there. I think so I'm gonna look at maybe 3 different things. And so I think in terms of like people's relationship with work, like my granddad's age, you used to have a job for life. You'd go and work for a particular company at the age of 18 or 60 or whatever, and you would work in that same company. My dad's age, you wouldn't work in the same company, but you'd have the same career and you'd work your way up the ladder. I'm of a generation now where I've had maybe 3 careers. Maybe every 10 years you end up having a different career. I think moving forward, that 10 years is going to collapse. And we're going to be seeing people, jumping careers much, much quicker. And so the skill you need to learn as a young person isn't the kind of stuff you learn at university. Was that I'm going to go and learn, how to do a particular job. Like I studied aeronautical engineering. Like, you're not going to now go and say, I'm going to study aeronautical engineering, then I'm going to be an aeronautical engineer for the rest of my life. You need to be somebody that's incredibly adaptable in order to survive. And I actually think the latest generation is incredibly adaptable. They are adaptable to technology. I work with a lot of people who are maybe kind of Gen Xers. And if you ask them, like, could you go and like shoot a video, they wouldn't have a clue what to do. If you go and ask a bunch of millennials, they'll be like, I've not done it, but I give it a go. And if you ask a whole bunch of Gen Zs, it's like, well, of course, I've been brought up using video for Instagram and TikToks and what have you. And so I think the latest generation are just really, really adaptable. And that adaptability, I think, is going to be their superpower, because every single time the platform shifts, I think they're going to find new opportunities. And so I'm feeling really positive on that end, that adaptability will be key. I think that the way I can describe it to people almost is that if you go back 100 years, every village would have a carpenter. And if you wanted to buy a chair, you'd go to the carpenter, and then they'd build a chair for you specially. And so that meant chairs were extremely expensive and time consuming, but it meant that the role of a carpenter was everywhere. And then along came industrialization, and particularly IKEA. Now, you don't go to a carpenter to buy a chair, you go to IKEA or Habitat or some other brand, and there will be a small number of designers who will design the chair, and then there will be automated CNC cutting processes that build the chair. That doesn't mean the carpenters don't exist, but there was going to be a lot less. I would imagine if you go back to the 1800s, there was probably a tenth of the number of carpenters now that there existed back then. There are still people that have got lots of money that want to install bespoke cabinets or, their own kind of like wine cellar or whatever. So there'll always be kind of jobs that don't fit the mold. But for most people, if you just want to go buy a chair or a billy bookcase, you can go and spend $50 in IKEA rather than $5,000 on a carpenter. So why not? Now, if you're a carpenter, this could be really depressing because your skill in your craft is no longer as widely used as it used to be. But it also means you're getting to do more fun stuff, because you're not just building chair after chair after chair, you're building these beautiful bespoke cabinets. But more importantly, it has always been a democratizing act. If you go and look at old stately homes in the UK that have 10 chairs because they had to be created by the Chippendales, who were a famous old chair maker, not the male strippers. So you go and you get your chairs done by the Chippendales, and they're really expensive, so you can only have a small amount of furniture. Nowadays, everyone has it. It's democratized. You can just go and you can buy furniture. Frankly, it's problematic because you buy it, you chuck it away, you buy it. It has low value. But it has put this in the hands of everybody else. And so we're moving to that same world. It used to be the case that if you wanted to have an app, you would have to raise a bunch of money, you have to build a team of 50 developers, and you'd build an app. Or maybe even 5 developers or whatever. Now, just like IKEA, you can go online, you can download Lovable or similar, and you can have a product that you've built in 5 or 10 minutes. And so I think we are moving to kind of really personal software, software that isn't stuff you download and someone else has built, but software where you talk to it and it kind of formats based on your exact needs. And because of that, you use it for a bit and you throw it away, and you do it again and you use it a bit and you throw it away. And so I think it's really, really exciting. So yeah, I think it's a different phrase we're doing, but yeah, if I was suggesting to someone whether they should be a carpenter in today's metaphor, I would say no, because I don't think those jobs are going to be long lasting. Or if you're going to be a carpenter, you need to be really, really good, and you need to be the best kind of 10% who are the ones who are going to survive. So yeah, but all bets are off. Who knows? Yeah, I it's impossible to kind of tell exactly what will happen, apart from the fact that it's really interesting. My the whole saying, may you live in interesting times. I think we are definitely there. And in fact, my email footer is I think a Karl Marx or maybe a Stalin quote actually, that says there are decades in which nothing happens, and there are weeks when decades happen. And I think we're in one of those weeks where decades are happening at the moment.
Yeah. I might sound a bit pessimistic over here. Adaptable, the sense to be adaptable, it is of course very, very important, especially right now. You have to be so quick on your toes. You need to be adaptable. You need to be flexible to learn anything that comes your way, and etc. So the examples that you took, for example, when IKEA came, a lot of the traditional carpentry, going to a carpenter shop and buying chairs and everything, that kind of run out. But the point is that the skill of being a carpenter, that was still intact, right? Yeah, IKEA sold furnitures and etc. But if you are a carpenter, you still have the brain to actually like build, use the tools, build furnitures from scratch with your hands and everything, and you can still find a way to I don't know, like open up a studio or like sell it in your street or in your neighborhood or something. You can do that.
Or it becomes a hobby.
Yeah,
This is a thing like this. Yeah.
that is like whatever. But right now what adaptable means is like that adaptability is different, because even if IKEA takes up what you are doing, you still have your brain, you still have your sense, you still have your creativity intact. But right now being adaptable means give up the thinking brain to AI. That is like, in my opinion, that's like a very big thing. In order to adapt to like new technologies, we are layer by layer shredding pieces of what makes us think harder, our critical thinking skills and all those kind of things. So that adaptability, the IKEA adaptability will still keep your creativity and senses intact. Whereas this tech adaptability, you have to shred in order to move fast, in order to like be adaptable. You have to shred layers of your critical thinking skills and like your brain and everything, and then replace that with technology and etc. And on
I mean, I'm not sure I 100% agree. I get where you're coming from. I still think in order to be able to use AI tools well, critical thinking is massively important, because we do know that these tools provide the sort of the mean answer. We do know that they still hallucinate. And so I think we do need to apply critical thinking to the answers. But it does definitely shortcut it. And I think it's really, really easy to kind of just default to what these machines spit out. But I would actually say, sadly, I would say that, I mean, again, I can't speak for every industry, but I think there's probably a lot of similarities. I think with designing, we've been there for the last 10 years. I came into a design industry where designers were upstream. Designers were talking to customers, designers were prototyping, designers were shaping the strategy, and designers were delivering. And what we've had for the last 10 years is what people call a feature factory, whereby product management is now doing all of the thinking. They are doing all of the custom discovery, which is branded research. They then write a PRD and they hand it to the designer, and all the designer is expected to do is implement it. I would argue that to some extent, product managers have been treating designers like ChatGPT for the last 10 years. Don't tell me what you think. Here is a thing, go away and ship it. And whenever they come back and they push back and say, I don't think this is right, I think maybe you got something wrong. It's like, no, just ship it. Your job is to ship, my job is to. So all we've done is, I think we've been working like that for the last 10 years. And I think if these people have been dehumanized, they are not the carpenters out of the job. They are the people who used to be carpenters that are now manning the CNC machines on the shop floor. They're doing something that still shows they are producing chairs, but they are not thinking about the chairs. They're being given a plan for the chairs. They're being told what to build. And so I would say for a lot of designers, they're already there. I think the problem is that the existence of LLMs hasn't created this problem. It's exposed it for what it really is. And what it really is we are in an industrialized situation. And that is absolutely true of everybody. I mean, again, this is where the idea of saboteurs came from. The idea of throwing your clogs in the looms because you didn't want to, want to be a creative kind of weaver. And you didn't want the machines to take over. And so, this is a really common thing. So I do think that I think AI is affecting the way that we think, but I think a lot of designers haven't had that agency for many years anyway. So it's a systemic problem that AI is exposing rather than AI's fault. I'm not saying that makes it any less bad, but I just think for designers, we've been here for a while and we're only just realizing it.
Hmm. Say I'm not like anti-tech or anti-AI or anything. Like for example, Andy, like to be very honest, I'm 1 year into building this podcast. You will be the 26th episode. I've done 25 episodes single-handedly. I manage like the scouting, research, hosting, producing, distributing, recording, editing, marketing, all this kind of things like single-handedly with the help of AI wherever necessary. For example, AI helps me with the sound, actually, like with engineering the sound quality and everything. So it definitely helps me, like just like what you said, like some companies will shrink from 100% to 20%, and even in terms of the size. I think one of the things that AI is already making way for is like a one person business, right? As like one person, you can just like keep expanding. And also, Ada, like what you said about your father and grandfather, like as well. Today, I decide to do like a podcast this week. Next week, I just have the opportunity to do start a new business altogether. I just have the tools in front of me, and I just like have the awareness in front of me. I think that's what I'm saying. I think it's very cool. I think the kind of opportunity it produces is very cool. But at the same time, how many people like I think I'm thinking like large scale, like on a global level, that impact is still on a negative level, that because I can speak about me, I can speak about you, but if we like zoom out and see, hey, what is the impact of people who are just like graduating and like coming outside, like what do they do? You said something like really great, like you said, allowed to be crap. Actually, that is very like important, like us as artists or as creative people, or even if you're in any kind of industry, like a product manager, business analyst, I don't care, you have to go through the process of being crap. There is so much of learning and unlearning about who you are, what is your capacity, like how far you can stretch your creativity and everything in the process of being so dumb and crap. Now it's like, just get right to the perfect result using AI. That's worrisome. That is exactly the part of humanness and the skills that I'm saying that it's stripping away.
Yeah, and I think you're traveling again. I think one of the challenges that I see for, again, I can only speak to design. Like, it used to be the case that companies, agencies would hire junior designers to do a lot of the artwork, a lot of the lower level stuff. If AI could do that, then you don't need to hire those people. Um, what's happening now is those people are becoming freelancers. And so maybe the first 2 or 3 years of your career, it isn't joining a company, but freelancing. So you have that opportunity to do that learning independently. And then when you get to a certain level and you've got a big portfolio, then you can kind of get that job. Arguably, that's been the case for the last 10 or 15 years, because people don't want to hire crap designers. Like when I started, I was a terrible designer. Um, but everybody was terrible because the web was young, and so like no one knew how terrible I was. Now, it would be really quick to be discovered, and so you've got to have that kind of opportunity to learn and play. Absolutely, um, but yeah, I just think what you've described about your podcasting is, you are basically a one-person TV channel. Like back in the day, a radio channel, you would have had to have a physical location to go to with all the equipment. Now it's all miniaturized and consumer level. You would have had to have a sound engineer. Well, now you're using AI to do that. You would have had to have a marketing team. Now you're doing that yourself. And so you've gone from needing 10 people to produce this thing to one. That is amazing. So that creates a whole upwelling of creativity. Now, the problem is when that happens, when the barrier to entry lowers, two things happen. The volume increases and the quality decreases, because now if anyone can do it, there's no, you're not having to go to a radio station to be interviewed to tell whether you've got a good kind of patter. Anyone can get on there. And because of that, the volume is increased. And so this is what we're facing at the moment, I think, which is a real problem, is that discovery, basically. The big problem I see with startup founders now is not coming up with a good idea, and it's not shipping a good idea. It's whether you can get anyone to care about that idea, whether you can get anyone to watch it. If you had started podcasting 10 or 15 years ago when it was new, and you were maybe one of 100 tech podcasters, you would now be having millions and millions and millions of users. If you'd have launched 5 years after that, you might have been one of 1,000 or 10,000 podcasters, and you might be getting tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands. I think we're moving into a world where people will be launching podcasts and podcasts and podcasts and be getting hundreds or dozens. And the same is true of businesses, and the same is true of startups. And so the real skill, unfortunately, becomes selling, it becomes marketing, it becomes promotion, because in a world saturated, it's your ability to stand out. And unfortunately, I think that most people of the Gen X generation and maybe the millennial generation aren't anywhere near as good at promoting themselves as the Gen Zs, because they've been brought up in a highly commercial environment. The Gen X generation were taught that being self-promotional was the worst thing to do. Like, what was the worst thing a band could do? It could sell out. What was the worst thing an artist could do? It was sell out. What was the worst thing that an actor could do? They could sell out. They could go and do an awful movie. Now, what's the best thing that an actor can do? They can go and be, MC Universe. They can go and be in like a big blockbuster. Now that's not seen as selling out. The artists, the biggest artists there are kind of like the indie people kind of noodling in the back room. They're billion, multi-platinum selling artists. And actually there's a love for people making money and kind of being promotional. And so we are living in a world where, almost it doesn't matter what you do or whether you're good at shipping the thing, the skill is selling it. And I think we're just going to get even more and more of that. There's this idea, like I travel a lot to Japan, and in Japan, different areas of the city of Tokyo have bands. Like there's a band in Akihabara called AKB47, and that's the local band for the local area. And so you're not trying to have a band that is countrywide or citywide. You're having a band that is kind of like, maybe servicing 1,000 true fans. And so we're moving as more and more people could do things. People are moving into smaller and smaller pockets, and maybe they're making less money, but there's more opportunity there. So look, yeah, maybe the quality of creativity is going to drop. I think it probably will. But I think the real challenge is kind of being seen, being discovered, and that's if you're good at some promotion, then you're going to be in a good place.
Yeah. And also, can I say something? I don't know if it is like for my benefit or detriment or like whatever. One thing that I've been very clear right from the start is not to optimize for numbers, because in a 1 year span, I could have like had like 50, 60 or 70 guests on the episode or something. But what I wanted to focus on right from the start, because the Everything Playbook, the podcast is just like one part of it. I have like a lot of other things, like for example, like offline events, like gatherings, etc., to actually be part of like different startups, collaborate more and everything. So I see like it expanding. So one thing I was very clear right from the start is to like focus on the depth of the conversation, the importance and the depth of the dialogue. I completely agree with your point as well. Marketing is a huge pain, which is something I still very much like suck at. And this is one thing, if I could like just pull up some sort of like money, and if I could like invest in another person, the first thing I would really invest in another person is hire somebody who's great at marketing, because I'm just like terrible at it. But like I completely agree with your point. I think if you can just like catch the right eye, if you can just like get into the right space and market your product effectively, I think that is one thing that is going to like, I don't know, get you to the next step or something.
Yeah.
But I feel like moving forward long term, one thing that will at least, it's just my personal belief, is also because like I said, it's all about now the number, the speed. Okay, because probably my neighbor has a podcast, probably my neighbor on the left has like a podcast, so that's possible. But what I'm trying to optimize is like the depth of the dialogue. I just really want to be as deep as possible, go get as punchy as possible, and to like not just be like, hey, hi, how are you, okay, what I want to move past that and see like have kind of a real dialogue where we are talking about some sort of like the present and future in mind. I don't know. It's just like my thing, because I completely understand. I think marketing is one thing, and the depth of the dialogue also, I think, so would sort of determine the longevity of a particular product that you're building or something. Yeah, that's great. The other thing, so the one thing that I want to ask is that now, we were talking about businesses where the number of employees might increase, reduce, and we were also talking about like this one person business, etc. So back then, I remember reading Steve Jobs' autobiography, etc., and like reading about like how all these tech founders were. So there was a vision about what is a founder, right? Like a founder needs to have like a certain criteria. A founder needs to have certain people skills or like negotiation skills, etc., and things like this. Do you see that itself needs to be rewritten in some way at the present time? Because now we have like one person businesses. And also, again, like I said, you're not just like communicating with humans anymore. You're also communicating with machines. Do you kind of see the definition of a founder itself, of being who a leader is, or what are the skills or the traits a leader should have? Do you see any difference between how it was, or what, or in your opinion, what are the skills or the traits do you think a leader or a founder today should have?
I mean, again, it's a good question. I think the answer is I don't think so. I mean, I think um, there are lots of people who have ideas of businesses they want to start, but don't, for very good reasons, often have the nerve to put those ideas in place. And often it's because they've got a comfortable job. They realize that doing it is a huge risk and there's a really good chance you might kind of not succeed. And actually, your opportunity cost is pretty poor. If you've got a really nice paying job, you've got a mortgage, you've got a family, you like holidays, etc., then don't do it. And there are a few people who are brave enough or stupid enough to say, no, like, I'm not going to settle. I'm going to take the risk. And actually, if they take the risk and they excel, it's amazing. And if they take the risk and don't excel, well, either they do it again and do it again and do it again until they do, or they fail multiple times and find themselves in a really tricky situation. So look, it's a safe path versus the unsafe path. And if you look at the number of tech companies that fail, particularly, like, taking that risk is probably a stupid thing because 9 times out of 10, or maybe 99 times out of 100, the entrepreneurial journey won't work. And one of the reasons we almost kind of laud people like Steve Jobs or whomever is because survivor bias. These are the ones that they took a chance and it paid out, and we all think they're geniuses. What we don't do is look at the 99 other people who could have tried to start or did try and start computer companies in the 90s and they absolutely failed. We need to kind of take these in balance. So I think entrepreneurship is a amazingly important thing because it's a massive generator of wealth, and a massively generator of jobs as well. But it's also incredibly risky. But what I do think is AI is reducing the risk. And also AI is reducing, again, back in the day, you maybe needed to either come from really rich family, have lots of wealthy friends that could angel invest in you, or go out and raise a very large amount of VC money to be able to build out a massive team. And now you don't do that. And so the barrier to entry has come down, which means I think we're going to see more and more entrepreneurs. And these people still have that entrepreneurial spirit. They still have that go-getting spirit. Um, and it's that risk-taking, I think, is the most important thing. If things start to take off, then as a founder, you need to adapt. And again, adaptability. I think founders are basically changing their jobs every 6 months. When you are a solo founder, you are engineer, product manager, marketing person. And then you have a team of 10. And so now you're engineering manager and you're product leader and you're like the investment manager. And then you have a team of 100 and you're the head of operations and you're the head of HR and you're the head of culture. And then you have 1,000 and you're something else. But every 6 months, your job is fundamentally changing. And for some people, that's the most exciting thing because they're maybe a bit ADHD. They don't want to settle down into one thing. And there are other people that they can't imagine anything worse than constantly having to change change what your job is from day to day. And so I think AI is not removing the need for those skills, but it's accelerating it, and it's giving more people the opportunity to kind of jump in and explore. And it might be right for some people, it might be wrong for others. But again, it's definitely interesting, and it's great that like you just don't have to be independently wealthy or come from Harvard anymore. You can just be a teacher with an idea for a product that's going to help your pupils, and you can build it and you can launch it in your own time. And if it's successful, you can make a living off it. And if it's really successful, you can build a business out of it. And I think that's amazing.
What do you look for, or what do founders or people in a position to like actually hire people, like even like for example, like let's like take me. What do you think people should look for when hiring other people? What are the skills or the traits that people should look for in other people?
I mean, that's a little bit too broad because I think every job has a specific set of skills. Like if you are hiring an airplane pilot, you want somebody who is fastidious, focused on detail, very calm under pressure. When the red lights are blinking in the cockpit, you don't want them to kind of like lose their shit. If you are wanting to hire somebody who is I don't know, a improvisational, I don't know, comedian. You want the opposite. You want someone who's in the moment, who's flexible, who's clever, who's sharp-witted, who, you know. So I think it is really dependent on jobs, you know. So yeah, that's an impossible question to ask. But I think if you're asking for yourself, like, what are the skills that we need for product managers? Um, I think the best product managers um are kind of entrepreneurs at heart. They're kind of the entrepreneurs that kind of don't quite have the nerve to go out and build their own thing, but are really, really tuned in. They're avid readers. They're voracious podcast listeners. They really care about growth, about building something of value. They really understand human needs, and so like if you have an engineering mindset, often you're building things based on what's easiest for you, on a very kind of simplistic view of what humans need. I think designers and product managers need to be really good at understanding. This thing looks good on paper, it looks good on screen, but it's not going to work for this user because of X, Y, Z. And so, it's a much used kind of term, but empathy. And I mean empathy not in terms of sympathy, but in terms of being able to look at a problem from first principles, to be able to look at a problem from what would this be like if I'd never used this tool before, if I didn't know how it worked, how would I get through? Problem solving, basically. We there are largely, I mean, there's lots of different ways of looking at this, but some people say there are three ways of problem solving. There is deductive reasoning, there's inductive reasoning, and there's something called abductive reasoning. Now, deductive reasoning tends to be pure logic. It's what the engineers are really good at doing. Inductive reasoning, like inducing something, is kind of looking at the stats and the facts and figures and trying to make an inference from the data. And I think product managers are really good at this. Analytics people are really good at this. The weird thing is that most companies don't have an awful lot of abductive thinkers, and abductive thinkers are it's the mode of thinking that kind of Sherlock Holmes uses. You will bathe in the data, you'll bathe in the information, and suddenly you'll get a spark in your mind, and you'll explore a theme or a theory. And once you've explored it and you've figured it out, you'll look back at the data trend, it becomes obvious, but it only becomes obvious after the fact. And so I think we need a world where we're not all deductive thinkers or inductive thinkers. We need more adductive thinkers, which is why I think I want to hire more people that have got a mixed skill set. I want to hire more designers, more product people that have that kind of that first principles kind of like first, user type mindset. And that's a skill that I really, really value. That, and again, communication skills, the ability to write, the ability to stress test things, I think is also really important. But this is why we have kind of like Myers-Briggs tests, because every single one of the people on those kind of lists of types of person are good for certain kinds of jobs and not for others. But yeah, I think more entrepreneurial thinking is going to be more no more of a necessity moving forwards.
Yeah. Yeah, I would also say someone who knows to spot opportunities with like around, just like to spot opportunities and to also filter, okay, what opportunities are like something that I can immediately dive into and take action and I can scale, and what, like, kind of prioritizing the opportunities, because I think we are also living in a time where when you can do anything, you have multiple options to do something, then you need to sort of like make the decision to like do that, and also be sort of like, I guess, like a self starter, like use that creative energy to just like jump into it, like explore, experiment, that sort of.
I think a lot of people are afraid to be wrong. I think a lot of people are trapped by their own ego. They don't want to suggest something because it might be wrong, and then they don't suggest something, and then somebody else on the team suggests it, and then they harbor all kinds of annoyance and frustration because, like, well, I had that idea, and it's like, well, you had it, but you didn't communicate it, or you did communicate it, but not effectively in the way that landed. And so, I think you have to be willing to spot opportunities. You have to be willing to take risks. You have to be willing to back them in a way that lands really well. But that is risky. And so I think a lot of the time we back away. A lot of the time, the reason we're bad at really selling something is because we want to actually have a get out clause. We want to be able to do it not quite well enough to land, so we can tell ourselves we took the shot, but we didn't sort of put everything in it. So we did kind of put ourselves on the line. So I think that kind of that attitude is really important. There's a really well-known product leader called Shreyas Doshi, who talks about this idea of product sense. This idea that are just some people that have built up over the years a real sense of taste. And that taste comes from using lots of products, from knowing what works and what doesn't. And it's difficult to teach, it's difficult to kind of put your finger on. But there are just some people who are good at doing these things, and there's some that are bad. This is also true, I'd say, in design. There are some people who are just better designers than others. There are some people who are just have a gift for a particular sport or a particular game or what have you. And so I think there are undoubtedly groups of people in the product world who have this kind of product sense and have the ability to kind of pick opportunities, back them, and put their reputation on the line. And I think that's a worthy skill, and that is that entrepreneurial spirit I talked about earlier.
And I think there's a lot of growth in there, just like making mistakes, like facing those mistakes, making rubbish and just like facing the rubbish and just still having the perseverance, like, okay, I'm gonna try to get like 1% better the next time. I'm gonna try to get 1% better the next time. That is, I think there is like this door of shame of like shame of like embarrassment and all these kind of things, where if I try this, if I fail, it's gonna be so bad, it's gonna be all crap. And like how, but the thing is that like once you just like push yourself through the door, and if you just like admit it, yes, it is crap, but but there is, I see a potential in myself
Yeah.
and in what I'm doing to like actually like get better. It's like I'm personally like feeling it. It's such a fulfilling curve. Really, because it kind of reveals a lot about like who you are and what your capacity is, and even like what kind of like what is your tolerance level, what is your skill level, and everything. I think that that only kind of gets exposed when you create rubbish, actually. Like it's a number.
I think this is why being an entrepreneur is amazing. Like, if you work in a company and you make one mistake, you might never live it down. But what you do really quickly is you learn not to make mistakes. With an entrepreneur, all you're doing is making mistakes. You're making lots of shots on goal, and most of them fail. But the more shots on goal you take, the more you'll figure out how to do it well, and the more we're likely to go in. And so I think being an entrepreneur, being that freelancer before you get the full-time job, doing, before you go and work at the big company, doing dozens and dozens of design works for local small businesses, you get to do some wins, you get to have some losses, but you learn. Being a product manager, like, is great. But if you run your own business and you've had to do sales and marketing and product work, and you've seen that the idea that you had, there's no one else to blame. It was your fault. You learn, you get better. Whereas if you're in a big company, you go, oh, well, it was engineering that didn't deliver it properly, or the marketing team didn't back it. There's always a really good way of explaining why it wasn't your fault. And as an entrepreneur, as a founder, you can't do that. Eventually, the buck stops here. And so, this is why second-time founders are the most backable, because they've made all the mistakes. Hopefully, they've learned from it, and next time around, they ain't going to make them again. And this is why I see a lot of early-stage founders hiring former founders, because they've got that same kind of willingness to kind of explore, and have done the hard yards. So yeah, I think you're absolutely right.
Andy, what kind of, if I may ask, like what kind of companies do you invest in? Like what kind of startups do you invest in?
Yeah, so I work as a venture partner for a couple of days a week at Seedcamp. Seedcamp are one of Europe's kind of top three, maybe, like pre-seed and seed stage companies. So we invest at the very earliest stages possible. We're probably the first institutional check that they've ever received. And we're a generalist fund, so we invest in everybody. In Europe, there are lots of fintech companies. So we've invested in a lot of fintech companies, like Wise are companies that we've invested in. We invest in lots of health tech companies. We invest in lots of B2B SaaS. Obviously, at the moment, AI, like everyone's got an AI tool company out there. So we're investing in, both end user products and also kind of a middleware, kind of data layer type products. We basically, we invest, our goal is to invest in the best, most promising founders throughout Europe. So we don't limit ourselves to any particular sector. We focus on finding that top talent and backing them. Um, so yeah, so we're very kind of like, idea agnostic. We we maybe get 7,000 people like give us a deck every year. We might talk to about 400 of them. We might invest in 40. So of those 7,000 ideas, we're picking 40 people. And, if we're lucky, one or two of those will become a unicorn.
Mm. Can I ask for the process? So when you filter, so when you're talking about like 7,000 to 4,000 to 40, I'm guessing you're kind of like focusing on the product idea itself and also the people behind it, right? So
Yeah, this is it. I mean, so a couple of things that might be useful for your visitors. Actually, this is a little plug, and I'll explain why in a second. But I also started a podcast recently called The Design VC. We're on episode number 12. Your audience should definitely go and check it out. But I also have a Medium um, publication called The Design VC. And on The Design VC, I've got lots of articles all about like how VCs make decisions, why they turn companies down, etc. So a lot of what I'm going to say now, your audience can kind of go to and read those articles. The weird thing is that I think a lot of founders think the most important thing is the idea. And the idea is really important. But the idea probably isn't unique. If we're seeing 7,000 ideas a year, there's a really good chance that when you come to me with an idea, we've already seen some version of that. We've probably seen 5 or 6 versions of that. And it might not be exactly the same. It might be 90% or 95%. And a lot of founders would argue, oh, but this last 5% is a really important thing. But often that last 5% isn't the important thing because you're overestimating the value of that 5%. And maybe we saw the same idea 2 years ago and we passed on it because the timing wasn't right or because the founder wasn't right. And if we don't invest in you, we know that this idea is going to come back again in a year's time because it's an obvious idea. And so our job is to go, well, should we invest in you or should we wait for a year and see who else is the next person that brings it? And if we wait a year, maybe the market will be better or maybe the person will be better. And so your job is to make me feel that I'm missing out because if I wait for another year, maybe the market has already exploded or I've missed my opportunity. And maybe the next person that comes along isn't anywhere near as good as me. So I actually think probably the product is the third most important thing. The first most important thing or second most important thing are probably tied are like, why is now the time for me to invest rather than last year or next year? And why am I the team that's going to knock this out of the park? Because if I wait a year, I might find someone that's, a 2 or 3 time founder who's already sold a bunch of businesses, who's built a unicorn. I might find somebody who is so networked into this industry that they're going to get their first 100 customers just by phoning up their friends. So you've got to prove to me that that's you, that you are the person to do this. And if you can't, I'll wait because, someone will come along in a year's time.
yeah. What is it about a founder that makes you say yes or no about the founder, just about the founder? What is it about the founder that makes you go yay or nay?
Yeah. I mean, like building $1 billion business is hard. And so what are the qualities that you can show to me? Like, I believe that you can probably build a product because most people can build a product now. But I believe that you can probably grow to a team of 10 or 50. But you've got to demonstrate to me that you've got the capability to build a team to 100, 500, 1,000. You've got to prove to me that not only can you build the product, but you can land the first 100 users, you can land the first 1,000 users. And so it's that ability to grow and scale and manage big things. So do you have that in your background? Like, have you worked in a big company before? Did you grow a team from 5 to 50? Have you raised money before? Or have you worked in a company that's raised money? Were you part of that process? Have you scaled a business unit where you can land, more users? Do you have an understanding of marketing? Do you have an understanding of like all of these things? And so it's people coming with entrepreneurial spirit. It doesn't have to come from a company. Like you might be someone that's just out of university, but you managed your university padel club. And actually, you were the one that got padel courts installed at the university when the university didn't think there was any future in padel. And you put on the first padel tournament and you grew your padel community to like, 500 people or whatever, and you ended up running this company that had a budget of, 10,000 or 50,000 pounds. Like, that shows some gumption. That shows some organizational capability. That shows your ability to influence people. That doesn't mean you've run a big business before, but it shows me that you've got all of those capabilities to do that. And so it's those kind of things. Like, how can you prove to me that if I give you £1 million, you're going to turn that into 10 million, and then turn that into 100 million, and then turn that into 1 billion? And like, those people are rare. Like, you know, there are only, a few hundred unicorns in Europe. There are only a few hundred founders that have that capability. And so, you've got to kind of come across as though you've got that, ability to kind of grow and scale. So yeah, we're looking for needles in a haystack. We're looking for exceptional people,
Yeah.
And being just merely good or great, like, you've got to be exceptional. And so how do you prove you're exceptional?
Wow, that's very inspiring to actually like listen. I guess it's a bunch of things, right? Like power of influence, like being able to like articulate, communicate, and having a like. I think honestly, I feel like just the ability to hold on to your vision for a long period of time. That's because because you're going to be flooded with a lot of people who are going to say no to you, who are going to close their door at you. But that kind of like grit and persistence to just like keep pushing, pushing, pushing. That's hard. That's really, really hard, right? And I completely get your point. Like these people who, in spite of all that, who kind of like catch your eye. I think they are definitely like unicorns, like unique unicorns. Yeah, that's interesting. And just to stay on this a little bit, like, are there any products or like tech in or even industries that you are personally very excited about? Um,
I mean, this is a really common question that VCs get, and my answer is always a little bit unsatisfying, because actually I'm really excited about boring businesses.
Mm.
Like, every designer in the world that starts a startup says, I'm going to create a design tool company because I understand design, and I know Figma is broken, and I've got all of my networking designers, so I'm going to create a design tool company. So every month someone will email me and say, Andy, I'm creating this new AI driven like Figma destroyer. And so there's so much competition on the market. Whereas if someone comes to me and says, like, Andy, I'm a designer, but my dad has worked in logistics for all of my career, and I've seen that the logistics industry is broken. It's using 20-year-old technology, um, and everyone that uses it is really frustrated. But all of that generation are retiring, and all the new people in logistics are coming through, and they're that app generation. They're the mobile phone, the iPhone generation, and they're looking at their software and they're hating it. But no one is building modern software tools for this outdated business. And it's really difficult to break in because it's not something you would know unless you come from a family that has done that. And so I'm building this amazing design first logistics tool that saves companies tons of money. It reduces the amount of time that's spent warehouses moving things around backwards and forwards and whatever. And I'm like, wow, that's amazing, because you're not going to get some young person off the street saying, hey, look, like, logistics is the most exciting space. And so, somebody who's got the skills, got the network, but are doing it in a really, really underserved industry that could be worth billions. And so it's those kind of things. It's the ones that on the surface you think that surely that is a solved problem. And then you look into it and it's like, no, this is massive and it isn't solved. I mean, again, like a classic example, I mentioned Intercom. Like, Intercom, founded by a designer, Des Trainer, comes from a design agency, built a tool for customer services. Now, historically, customer services have been a bunch of people in a call center answering the same conversation over and over and over again, costing a ton of money, not creating an awful lot of kind of value. And Intercom decided that that's where they wanted to put their design jobs. It wasn't a design tool, it was making the customer experience better. And then when AI came along, they pivoted it towards Fin, and now they've made this great AI kind of like service agent. It's those kind of things, like boring, underserved, broken companies, like broken products that are difficult to solve. Like, if it's easy, everyone will do it. If it's difficult, that suddenly becomes exciting. So yeah, it's those boring sectors that I'm most excited about, and all the flashy ones, everyone else is already, doing that and doing it well. So yeah.
Right. I'll switch to something important. So one of the articles that I read a couple of articles that you wrote, and one of the things that you read is about like the European startup market regulations versus the US regulations and everything. I think it's like well thought out. Like it was like a really good read. I would link it in my in the podcast as well. It was really good. I think it's a lot of it's a bunch of concerns that people who are living in Europe, they have the pain that they go through. It is like well written. So one thing that I sort of like want to ask you is that I think you clearly pointed out some reasons behind why European regulations are very strict compared to like the US, the regulations in America and the startup industry. Because here we have stricter and more secure label market, and we care about like the food safety, the food standards, etc. So we don't want anything that would abuse the rights or the privacy of the citizens living in Europe. Listen, I'm an immigrant living in Europe, and that is exactly, in fact, I would say the primary reason is that I value the quality of food here. I mean, I feel like as a human being, there's a basic thing. You want to be able to eat good food, and that is actually like my primary like reason why I would be here than to switch.
I mean, just on that subject, I remember being in America a couple of years ago where there was an outbreak of salmonella in washed salad, and everyone was reminding you have to wash your salad, you have to wash your salad. And in the UK, we don't tend to do that because actually we probably should, but we're not using so many herbicides and pesticides, and the food standards are so much more that we kind of don't need to. I mean, there's this thing in the US where they wash chicken in chlorine. And we don't want to do that. We want to have healthier chickens. We don't want to have like mass farm chickens that you have to kind of, do these chemical treatments to make them safe. And so, like, I don't think if you live in America, you assume that all these things are normal. And then you come to a country like Europe where all these regulations actually make your life easier. I didn't have to worry about, like getting ill from the food I eat because we've got safety standards here that protect us. And look, this is a decision we've made. America as the political system has put in power people that have constantly deregulated in these areas. And in Europe, we put in power people because we want to feel safe around our food or education or healthcare. So I think there are perfectly reasonable reasons why different countries have gone in different directions. However, I would also say that like there's this weird idea that America is a really easy place to do business and Europe isn't. Like so many places in America, like they have so many small little rules and allowances and certificates you need to buy and get. And so like actually I think America is surprisingly hard to do business in certain situations and certain settings. So I don't think it's as easy as just like Europe is difficult, America is hard. I think if you have to engage with the government in America, it can be really frustrating. They're using technology like you look at GDS. GDS in the UK it's not perfect, but it's a beautifully designed, really easy way of engaging with the government. And even me just trying to hire, like, get an Esther to go to America, like, it feels like I'm stepping back 30 or 40 years in time. So I think, dealing with lots of the bureaucracy in America, there's much more bureaucracy in many parts of life than there is in Europe. I just think Americans don't see it. They kind of, it's kind of like you walk around your neighborhood and you ignore all of the rubbish that you see in your neighborhood. And then you go overseas and you see rubbish and you go, oh, well, they've got a rubbish problem. And it's like, you just get blinded to what you think is natural in your own country.
Yeah, but I think we are living in a capitalistic society, and also the big tech that we're talking about, like for example, Google, Meta, Facebook, etc. These people, they are not just like standalone big tech companies. They are part of like the core government infrastructure right now, right? And not just like the government infrastructure within the United States of America, but they also sort of like dictate like what the global population consumes, what the global population thinks is possible, not possible. I mean, we are using their applications by the end of the day. But
I mean, there's definitely more regulatory capture in America. I think American politics requires more money. You require so much more money to become a president in the US than you do a prime minister in the UK or a president in France. So these very, very large companies spend lots of money on influence campaigns,
Yeah.
and they will shape policies that benefit them rather than necessarily benefit the population. I think in Europe, it's a little bit more balanced. I think we have a little bit more balance between we still take money in donations and we still consider what's good for business owners, but I think we maybe prioritize labor laws a little bit more. We have, you know, in the UK, we have a decent minimum wage. Now, if you were running a sweatshop, you would say, "This is terrible. I can't afford to pay £15 an hour. I can only make a profit if I pay for 5." And sure, so that means that you could argue that the laws here are not friendly to a sweatshop owner. But then you've got to ask, why should that business exist and why should it be abusing its staff? And so I quite like the fact that we live in a country where there are checks and balances and the population are somewhat protected and looked after in a way that you can't in America. I think one of the biggest things, the article you point
But
at,
does
a lot of
but does it concern you? Does it concern you that does it, my two-part question is that, first of all, does it concern you? The regulations are great. Like I said, I completely appreciate the things that we are given in here in Europe, and like the safety standards, etc. But at the same time, it really kind of like prohibits from creating like a company that is equal or paramount to like Google or Meta or things like this. Does that concern you? And also, what is the way? What is the way to make for more better and bigger tech?
But I don't think it does. I think this is the frustration I have, is I think it's really common for Americans to look at Europe and say, well, Europe isn't as successful in the startup world as America, and so therefore it must be due to regulation. That is a really simple leap. But I don't believe that's the reason. Sadly, I think a lot of this actually comes back to the Second World War. America stayed out of the Second World War for a really long time. And when it came into the Second World War, it wasn't like physically under threat. It didn't have the threat of invasion imminent from the northern or southern borders. They weren't bombed. They didn't lose anywhere near the same number of percentage of people. And when a lot of the GIs came home, they had lots of natural wealth. They had lots of oil and lots of industry, and they profited. And so the post-war world in America was amazing. And America's been on this sort of post-war run since then. In Europe, we had to rebuild. And, we lost a lot of lives, a lot of, industry was decimated and bombed. And so, particularly the UK, the empire crumbled, Germany was in tatters, Europe was in tatters. And so a lot of that effort that could have gone into kind of stimulating the economy went into rebuilding. And so America had a head start. And then they had, they took over a lot of German engineering talent, for the Manhattan Project and electronics. And then we had Silicon Valley. We had, the rise of computing, and then we had the rise of like mainframes, and then the rise of uh, desktops, and the rise of mobiles, and the rise of the web, and then the rise of mobile web. So what's happened in California, because this is not an American thing, like the tech industries are not evenly spread around the whole of America. They're in California and a little bit in New York. And then they've obviously had offices in Austin and various other places. But it's a Californian thing rather than a US wide thing. And the whole of the US has benefited. Like if you look at the US stock market, it's being propped up by, a bunch of FANG, I don't know what they're called now, but like, a bunch of like, maybe 10 big companies. And if you took those companies out, the performance of the whole S&P 500 would be a lot less, and it'd be a lot more equivalent to where Europe is. But they've been able to start these companies because a small initial advantage compounds. They've done this. They've done these tests with like charts. You start by having 100 bits of music, and you order them 1 to 10 or 1 to 100 randomly. And the ones that are randomly at the top get more plays because they're more discovered, and they get better and better and better. And so this is why things happen in Silicon Valley, is post-war advantage turned into an advantage in hardware, which turned into an advantage in software, that turned into an advantage in the cloud. So every generation they make more money, they plow more money back in, and it's kind of an investment thing. So the UK and Europe has already kind of disadvantaged there. The other thing, as I say in my article, is America likes to typify Europe as a single country, but it's not. it's dozens of different countries, and each country has its own language, its own economy, its own laws, and so um you can't compare apples with oranges. So I don't think that the reason the UK hasn't produced as many unicorns as America has is because of the fact that we don't have fire at will, which is one of the main arguments we have. Oh, in California, you know, we could just fire anyone if we don't even like the look of them. They're we're not vibing with them, we'll get rid of them. We don't need an excuse. That's a great way of having gender discrimination. It's a great way of having discrimination against people's sexuality or having people's discrimination against race. That's awful. So we've decided that we don't want to allow people to fire you for any reason, any made up reason, because they just don't like you. We want to make sure that there's a reason there and it's perfectly reasonable. And so, you know, this is the environment we're in. And I don't think that's a fundamental reason why people are not making billion-dollar businesses. And so whenever someone says like it's because of the legislation, I'm like, well, what legislation? Name me 5 specific bits of legislation that have prevented European companies from being successful, and they can't point them out because that's not the reason. It's the post-war order and everything has happened post-war that has favored one country over that, and also about geography. We utilized all of our natural resources 100 years ago to take over the world in a horrible way. America has so much natural resources, right? The reason they're not being hit as much with the current, kind of war in the Middle East is because they have, shale oil. So, if you have all these natural benefits, you don't have, people threatening you on your northern and southern border. You can spend more money in other areas. And so, yeah, I think it's a fundamentally flawed argument, but it's one that pops up all the time.
Yeah, right. Andy, thank you so much. Thanks a lot. This was very, very insightful. And I think this, first of all, actually triggered a lot of insights in my own growth regarding like this with Everything Playbook and everything, because it kind of gave me like a bunch of ideas after this discussion with you. And I sort of hope if other early stage founders or wannabe entrepreneurs, wannabe founders, anybody who wants to do anything creative, non-creative, something gets something out of this, kind of like inspires them and like keeps them going. Thanks a lot. I really enjoyed it. This was very insightful, and thanks a lot for just like, just putting your heart out in whatever you were saying. So that was really, really nice. So thanks a lot. Thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure. I've had such a fun conversation. It's been really good chatting to you. So yeah, thank you.